Okay, good morning. Welcome to CIS 2400. So a few things before we start. In this section of the class, I'm going to go through the course materials. Now, I had another session this morning, and in that session, I actually covered the assignment for this week in details. So I went through the discussion, the one you're going to be working on for this week. And I also went through the apply your knowledge piece that is on Microsoft Access, and I went through the assignment. So once we finish this class, I'm going to post both videos. So you should have two videos. So one will be the one that goes through the assignment, and then the one that goes through the lecture for this week. So if you have any question, you can feel free to interrupt me as we continue, but basically that's how we are set up. I also mentioned about the performance from the assignment from last week in the previous window, in the previous video, I'm sorry. So make sure you do that. If you have any questions, you can always reach me. Email is a good way to do that. The phone is also a good way to do that. A discussion board, you can post something through there. So use whichever tool works for you. If there's no question, any question before we continue? Are you even there? Okay, so this is module 6, and we are looking at the data business intelligence, and the outline is you're going to be looking at the data quality. So this is actually one of the concepts that you're going to be covering in the discussion that you're going to be doing through VoiceThread. We talk about the concept of relational database, and when I was going through the assignment, I mentioned a lot about relational database. Now we are going to be seeing those concepts in this module. Using a relational database and business advantages, we'll look at that. And section 2 talks about business intelligence. So basically what you can see here is we are starting with data, and then from data you have information, from information you have intelligence, and then that intelligence is of course about the business. So that's how we end up with the concept of business intelligence. So as a person who is taking a class in the School of Business, you need to be able to relate that you start with the data, then you have information, and then you have the business intelligence. Now the assignment for the apply your knowledge actually is for helping you to create a database. So that is a tool that you're going to use to help you in collecting the data. And then from the data, you can generate the reports. Those reports are going to give you some information. And then from that information, if you continue adding more, you can get what you're calling knowledge. We'll also talk about the data warehouse, so which is a concept that is used to relate to big amounts of data. So the same way that we know of a warehouse, so we borrow this concept from the everyday use. You go to a warehouse, you have a big storage location for materials. So we have the same concept, but for data. And then we have this new concept that has been, I think, on for maybe the last 8 years now, blockchain. So this is a new concept which is gaining in popularity and is brought about by what we're calling distributed computing. I mentioned about this concept some time back about distributed computing, whereby you have computers in different locations, and basically what these computers do is they share the workload. So that's what is enabling this blockchain. So this section here talks about what is it innate for me. So I'll encourage you to read this. I don't think there is anything that is more complex here. You can read that. There's a little bit of opening case that talks about Bitcoin. Okay, so this is also very popular. So blockchain and Bitcoin, they go hand in hand. And Bitcoin, you're saying, is a new currency that was created in 2009, blah, 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 and all the way like that. So the way this concept works is through what you're calling blockchain. And now blockchain has very, very many applications. So read about that is something good to know if you're taking a class in the School of Business. So the next part here on the learning outcomes, we're talking about the data, information, and then of course databases. So we're going to be explaining the 4 primary traits that determine the value of data, okay? Traits, characteristics. We're going to describe what a database is, and then we talk about the database management system and talk about the relational database model. So all these concepts actually here, they are covered in the apply your knowledge. So it's two different ways that you can do it. Go through this material and then look at the assignment, try to do it on your own, and then go watch the video and see how far you're able to do, and then you can finish the assignment. Because if you watch the next video, the one I recorded before this, I go into details about how to do the assignment. But the best thing for, if I were you, what I'll do is I read the course materials and then try the assignment and then go watch the video and then see where I went wrong or where I went right. And that way you're able to gauge yourself and see how much you're learning. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the data quality. This is a question that's going to be there in your discussion. So we have the 4 traits that determine the value of data, and a little bit here talks about the value of information, and you're saying information is powerful and organizations need the information, they need the data, and on like that. So data is everywhere in the organization. Some of you are in marketing, some of you are in human resource, some of you are in management. Okay, so you need data for you to be able to run these departments. So we have this concept that we are calling the data granularity, which is refers to the extent of detail within the data. So that is fine and detailed, or coarse and abstract. So employees must be able to correlate the different. So correlation is the relationship. So employees must be able to show the relationship in the different levels, formats, and the granularities of the data. And this picture here helps you to explain that. So we are saying at the level, the data can be either at the individual level, it can be at the department level, or it can be the whole organization. So as a student, there is some data that we have about you. And then we have data for all the students in the department. And then we have data about all the students at Central. Okay, the same thing for the employees. Okay, we have employees, individual employees data, and then the department, and then the whole university. And then the format of the data. How is this structured? It can be in a document, like a Microsoft Word. It can be in a presentation, Microsoft PowerPoint. It can be in a spreadsheet, Microsoft Excel, or it can be in a database, Microsoft Access. Okay, so those are the different formats in which data can be presented. Anytime that, even if you have a document, like for instance, your assignment, that is data, because your assignment is going to be graded, and from there you're going to get some points. Okay, and then those points are going to be aggregated into your assignments for the whole semester, and you get a final grade. So when you present an assignment, there is data in that, and that sometimes is going to be either in a document or sometimes in a spreadsheet, depending on how the assignment is going to be structured. And then you're saying in terms of the detail. Okay, so some of this is going to be summary. Like for instance, we have a summary of all the students at the end of the semester who score an A in a class. And then we do the same thing for the what? The School of Business. So we have all the students who are CIS 2400, maybe it was 200 students, how many got an A? So that is a summary. Okay, and then you aggregate for the whole year. Okay, and on like that. So those are the different levels that you can have for the data. So at least have an idea about what we mean by the level and the format and the granularities. And these are the things that you're going to be finding in the real world. So the traits, remember we talked about the different traits of a data and the value that can have. So when you're talking about the traits of the data, we have these 4. We're talking about the type of the data, the type, and you're going to be looking at what that means. Timelessness, of course, comes from the word time. Okay? And we have quality. We are familiar with the concept of quality. And then we have the word governance, which comes from the word govern, control, who is in charge. Okay, so data type, we have transactional and analytical. Transactional comes from transactions. Okay, so things that are going on within the organization. Okay, and then analytical comes from what? Analysis. And we talked about analysis is where you're making decisions based on what? Facts. So analysis is coming from when you have data and then you do some manipulation on that data you analyze. Okay, so transaction encompasses all of the data contained within a single word, business process or unit of work. And its prime purpose is to support daily operation tasks. When you go to a gas station and you buy gas, there is data that is collected about you. That's what you're calling transaction. When you go to a store and you buy some items and you check out and you're given a receipt, there is some data that's collected about you. That is transaction. Okay, so they give you some of those examples right here. And then you're saying analytical is made up of all the data from the organization. And the primary purpose is to support the performance of managerial analysis task. Analysis, they're going to be management. They're making decisions. Okay, so analytical data is useful when you're making important decisions. So the key thing here between the data type, the transaction, and analytical is transaction is for supporting the daily operation of the organization. And then analytical is for making long-term goals, long-term decisions in the organization. Okay, so analytical data makes it possible to do many things that previously were difficult to accomplish, such as spot business trends. Is very, very important. Okay, so when you look at the data, you can see the trends in the data, and then from that, you'll be able to make decisions. Okay, to also be able maybe to prevent diseases. Now we know that the COVID is spiking in some places. How do they know it's spiking? Because they are collecting the data and they can tell that last week we had 10 infections, this week we have 20 infections. Now we need to do something. Maybe we need to wear what mask, maybe we need to shut down. Okay, maybe we need to have some sections where we can put what stations for people to wash their hands and on and on and on like that. Maybe we need to do decision. We need to do what social distancing. So that is based on analysis, and that's the role of the analytical data. Fighting crime the same way. So this shows you some examples of transactional data and analytical data. So transactional sales receipt, airline ticket, packaging slip, and what you're going to see is transaction is mostly going to be geared towards individuals. Is usually at the individual level, and then you have analytical is usually on the organizational level, because you don't create a trend just based on one data point. You don't decide how the farm is going to grow based on one point. You need to look at a holistic picture of the organization, which is going to be made up of data that has been collected for some time. Because for you to have growth, you need to have previous and the current. And from there, you're able to create to show the growth. Are we together? Anybody home?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, that's good. So remember we talked about these four concepts. So we have looked at the data type, transaction, analytical. We are going to be looking at the timeliness. Okay, so coming from the word time. Okay, so timeliness is an aspect of data that depends on the situation. Okay, time, situation. In some farms or industries, data that is a few days or weeks old can be relevant. In others, you need data that is right there. Okay, like now, it's very, very important that the states collect the timely data about the COVID, because if there is a place that has a lot of infections and they are late in collecting that data, then people will start continue doing spreading that, and that can be a problem. So timeliness of the data that we have is very, very, very important. You want to be able to make sure that you have the current data about the infections in a certain location. So we talk about what you're calling real-time data, means immediate, up-to-date. And then we have real-time systems that help us to provide that data. Okay? So there are some companies that actually use real-time data, and they give you some examples right here. So it's very important that you make sure that you understand. Usually, systems that collect real-time data are going to be a little bit more expensive because of the technology that is required to do that. Okay, so note about that, real time. Then you're looking at the quality. So business decisions are only as good as the quality of the data used to make. The discussion for this week asks you, why should companies be concerned about the quality of their data? And you have some of the answers right here. Okay, so inconsistency is not very important in the data. So when you have some data elements that have different values, you want to make sure that you avoid. Okay, and that leads to what you're calling data integrity issues. Okay, so when you have a system produces incorrect, inconsistent, and duplicate data. So you can think of it like you have a system whereby at the end of the semester to be getting a B in a class, and the system say that you have an A. You're supposed to be getting an A, and the system says you have a B. Okay, so and then for some students who are supposed to be getting maybe a C, they get an F, or who are supposed to be getting a B, they get a C. So inconsistency is not very good. You want to make sure that you have good quality data. Now, the quality of the data is going to be determined by the people who are entering the data in the system, and also the system, how the systems are designed. So when you design the system, and I mentioned that about the data validation in the assignment, there are some rules that you can put in your data system to make sure that when you enter the data, excuse me, it checks make sure that entering the right data. Sometimes you can have a bug in the system that will make the data inconsistent and read errors. So these are some things that you have to be aware of. So when you talk about the data quality, we're trying to make sure that we don't have inconsistencies, and also we don't have integrity issues. If our data is not of high quality, if it has inconsistencies, it has integrity issues, it's not going to help us to make the right decisions. Okay, so note about that. So some of the common characteristics of high quality data is accuracy. You want to make sure that your data is accurate. And how do you do that? Making sure that there are no incorrect values in the data. Okay? So most of the systems are trying to minimize human errors because humans contribute mostly to the data inconsistency in a system. That's why you find like most of the stores now are moving to self-checkout register. Now, in the old days, actually used to have systems whereby a cashier will look at the item and they punch in the price of the item. So with that kind of system, there are bound to be very many errors. And then later on, we came up with the scanning system. So when you are using the scanning systems, you minimize the errors in the system, okay? Because some of the errors can lead to a lot of loss to the organization. So the same thing with what? Complete. Is the data complete? So are there values that are missing? Is it consistent? Is it timely? And is it unique? So these 5 are some of the characteristics that can be used to define high quality data. So if it meets this, then the data is of high quality. So it doesn't matter whether you are a business miner or whatever field you are in, data is a concept that you're going to be working with. Because even law enforcement, they use data. Everybody uses data, and you need to make sure that you have accurate data. So here is an example of some data that has been entered in a system, and you can see there are very many holes in here, very many inconsistencies. So it means this data is not of quality. Okay? So missing data here for the first name, okay? Incomplete address, okay? You have probable what? Mistake, Roberts, and then Robert here, okay? Then you have potential what? Wrong. So the phone number and the fax are the same. Is that really correct? Okay, and on like that. You have invalid email, and usually you can have what you call the data validation rules when you're entering the data to make sure that, like for instance, if there is email, you can set up the format. Okay, if it's a phone number, you can set up that phone number should not be the same as the fax number. So you can set this when you're designing your database. That's what the CSB measures should be concentrating on, or at least be aware of. So completeness and consistency, those are some of the things that will make it not to be accurate. Okay, so moving on. So these are some of the costs that the business will incur if the data is not of high quality. Hint, hint, discussion question. Inability to track customers accurately. Difficult identifying the most valuable customers because your data is not consistent. It has errors. You can't tell who is your best customer. Okay. The cost of sending undeliverable mail, and they actually talk about that, I think, somewhere here. Okay. But you have people who you're sending mails to and they change their address, or you have the wrong number, you have the wrong address, all the way like that. Okay, you can't track your revenue properly. You can build strong relationship with your customers because your customers moved and you don't have a way of tracking them because your data is not consistency. Okay, and then we have some of the benefits of doing that. So it's basically the opposite of that. So look at that. The other concept is on the governance. So we talked about the data governance, and this is helping you to make sure that data governance refers to the overall management of the availability. So your data is available, okay? So you have system that you have set in place to make sure that your data is available. So what I mean by this is if you go to Best Buy and you want to buy maybe a computer or something, that information should be available on the website, okay? If you want to check your grade on Banner, that information should be available on Banner, okay? So that's part of availability. And there are some rules that have been set to make sure that that data is available. Same thing with usability. Is that data of any use in terms of integrity and the word security? Okay? So for instance, when you go to Banner, you can view your grade at the end of the semester, but you can make what? Changes to your grade. That's part of the governance. So there are some rules that have been set. The same way, I can view your grade, I can change the grade up to a certain point. After that, I don't have access to that. I can't change the grade. And if you need to change the grade, well, I need to change the grade, I have to go to higher level authority, somebody who has a higher access authority. So that's part of what you're calling data governance. So at least be aware of that. And then we have this concept of data validation. And this is nothing else but the test and evaluation that are used to determine compliance with data governance policies to ensure correctness of the data. So that's where you can set up, like for instance, if you're entering a phone number, it has to be in a certain format. So you say the first three values of the phone number are going to be in parentheses. So if somebody tries to enter something else, the system is not going to allow that. Same thing with social security number, first three numbers, and then you have a dash, and then the next two numbers, a dash, and on like that. That's part of what we're calling data validation. So far, so good?
Yes.
Okay, Danisha, you there? Okay, so what's going on here? So storing data using a relational database management system. This is part of the assignment. And we have talked about the data, quality of the data, value of the data, different types of data. So now we're going to be looking at how do we store this data? And we're using what's called the relational database management system. So relation comes from the word relation, okay? Relationships, okay? We have database, okay? And then we have a management system. So we have a system that's going to be helping us to manage this data. So the core component of any system, regardless of size, is a database and a database management system. So what is a database? Okay, you don't have to program this, but at least have an idea. We know of what a military base is. So the same concept, you can use it here. We talk about database. Maintains data about various types of objects. So objects can be, for instance, inventory. So like, for instance, at Central, we have a database that maintains data about what? The different objects. So what are the objects? Employees, the students, the staff, equipment, all the way like that. Those are what you're calling the objects. Okay? So it can be, in this case, we have inventory, we have transactions, we have people, we have places, and all that. Okay? So a database management system helps you to create, it reads, updates, and deletes data in a database. So in this week's assignment, we're going to be creating a database using a database management system. We're going to be creating a database using Microsoft Access. The database that you're going to be creating is about an animal hospital that we call Foothills Animal Hospital. Okay, so we're going to create a database for them, and you're going to be using Microsoft Access, not Excel, Access to do that. Okay, so we understand what a database is. We understand what a database management system is. It helps us to create. We are going to be creating some tables. You're going to be able to read. So reading is where you're able to access that data. You're going to be making some updates to the data, and you can delete some of the data. Okay. So, and you're controlling access and security. So you set security to make sure that not everybody has access to your data. If they have it, they're authorized to do that. Okay. So companies do this all the time. Now, if you are a CSB major, you're going to take a class that will actually walk you through what's called the database management system. And you're going to be able to create a database. So you learn about database, go into more details, and on like that. So there are two primary tools that are available for retrieving data from a database management system. Because remember, we're talking about a database is a repository of data. So we create all those tables about the different employees and the staff and all the students, and we need to be able to get that data. It's very similar when you go to Banner and you want to see your grades. Okay, so that's part of what we are calling retrieving the data from database management system. So to retrieve the data, we use query by example, what's called the QE tool. You don't need to program this, but at least have an idea that that is a way in which you can retrieve data. Now you do this all the time, but you don't know that actually that's what you're doing. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Okay, but anytime that you go into Banner, anytime you come to Blackboard and you're accessing the class, you're actually using this concept. Okay, so query by example tool helps users graphically design the answer to a question against a database. So you usually click on a button. That button will give you information about your grades and all the way like that on banner. Okay. The same thing with your transcript. You click on a button, put some information, and then you're able to see your transcript with all your classes and your grades. That's part of what you're calling retrieving the data. You can either use query by example or you can use a structured query language. Okay. So SQL, you might have heard about this. This is spelled as SQL, that asks users to write lines of code to answer question against a database. So basically, this is done by the database programmer, and what you as a user, you don't even see this. Okay? If you're a CSB major, or maybe if you have taken a database management class, you might have come across this, but usually we do these things without knowing that we are doing it. Okay, so those are the techniques that you can usually use to help you with that. So this is an example of what you're saying. You as a user, you use a database management system to help you access the data which is in a database. So for this week, as the users, you're going to be creating a database using a database management system, and then we'll come back and be able to retrieve that data. So there is that relationship. Okay? So we have what you're calling an interface, which is the front end, and then we have the back end, which is the database, and we're using the database management system to help us to do that. Okay, so we'll create one table that's called the customers, and then you're going to input some data about the customers, and then we'll come back later and retrieve that data. So that is the concept of what you're calling a database and a database management system. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, so data cleansing debate, you can read a little bit about that, how you make sure that your data is clean. Data element or field, we talked about this, is the smallest or basic unit of data. So when you have a table, that table is going to be divided into fields, and the field is the same as the columns. You're familiar with the table, and you have seen tables before. So when you have a table, table has the field. Each of that field is what you're calling a data element and is the smallest unit of data. Usually, like for instance, like I mentioned in the assignment, if you have address in the US, the address usually has the name, and then it has the number, and then it has the city, it has the state, it has the zip code, like that. So usually when you're creating a table and entering data into a table, you want to make sure that each of those elements are individual fields. Okay, so the name is on its own, the city is on its own field, the state is its own field, and the zip code is its own field. Because down the road, when you're going to be manipulating your data, it's going to be easier when you have set those fields as basic units of data. So note that, because I mentioned that in the assignment, and when you did this and then you got the assignment, hopefully you'll be able to relate that. So these are some of the data elements that we have. Customer's name. So in the assignment, we have a table or what you call entity that is called customers, and it has the customer's name, it has the customer's ID, and on like that. Okay. Sometimes we have what you're calling the metadata. Okay. So provides details about the data. So metadata is data about data, if that makes sense. Data about data. Okay. So metadata for an image could include its size. So you have an image, and then that image you have some information about it. What's the size of this image? What is the installation? What is the date that it was created? Okay. So that is not something that everybody is interested in. But you, as a programmer, as a business major, you might be interested in that, because if you're going to be putting that image on a website, you need to know about this. So sometimes we have what you're calling the metadata. So read a little bit about that. We also have what you're calling data dictionary. So if you're taking a DBMS class, you will be revisiting this concept again. So you have metadata, and then you have data dictionary. Compiles all of the metadata about the data elements in the data model. The same way, you have a dictionary. Dictionary explains words. Okay, you go in there and you're looking at a word, and then it gives you the definition of that word, where did it come from, and then synonyms and on like that. The same thing we have about the data dictionary. So you have some data, and then you have definition of all those data elements. What does it mean? Okay, so this is a concept that you will come back to at it in the future. Okay, so how do we store the data elements? We use entities and attributes. Entity, you'll hear this in the database management system. Entity is the same as a table. Okay, so in our assignment, we have various entities. We have customers, we have the pet, we have the treatment, we have the visit. Those are entities, or what you can also call tables. Okay, and then we have attributes. Okay, so for flexibility in supporting business operations, managers need to query or search for the answers to business questions, such as which artist sold the most business albums during a certain month. So a relational, coming from the relationships database. So basically what you're saying is, see, I'm going to use this example here. These are different entities, or what I can call tables. So we have one table that's called tracks, another table that's called the recordings, another table that's called the musicians, and you have another table that's called the categories. Instead of having these four tables, you can actually have everything on one table. You can just have one table that's going to contain all this information. Now, the disadvantage of having one table is that it becomes very difficult for us to populate or to add data into that table. Also, if we are going to be able to create some record, analyze the data, it becomes very difficult. Because you can imagine, if we have one table, it's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 12, 13, 14. Okay, so 14 columns. So that's going to extend. Okay, and you can imagine Central with all the items that we have at Central. If we need all the attributes that we have at Central, if you're going to be creating one table to include all that information, it's going to be manageable. So what we do is during the design, when we decide what type of data we want to collect about our objects, then we break down that data into tables, or what we are calling entities. And then we create relationships between those tables so that we are able to gather data from those different tables. So that is where the concept of the relational database comes from, because relational is coming from the word relationship. So what we mean is, see this entity here on the table track, it has information about what? The tracks, and is related to the recordings entity or table. Okay, the track table is related to what? To the musicians, because the musicians are the ones who make the tracks. Okay, and then we also have what? The different categories. So we have that concept of the relationship, and those relationships are established through what you're calling the primary key and the foreign key. Primary key. In every entity or table, you have one field. This is a field. Track number is a field. Track site title is another field. Track length is another field. Record is another field or column. So the entries in one row, represent a record. This is a record, another record. So a record is made up of multiple what? Fields that represent a unique entity. Okay, so they represent a unique record. So we have, this is one record, another record, another record. So think of it not in the music industry, but record. The same somebody says you have a record. In, like, we use this usually in the criminal jargon. If somebody has a speeding ticket, it means you have a record. So it means when we go to the database for the speeding, we are going to see your name, we see the car you're driving, the date, and the offense, okay, for you specifically. So that is your record. And then if that policeman had 5 people on that day, we might see all of them. So we see 5 different records for 5 different individuals. So each record has a specific field that is used to uniquely identify that record. So how do you know that is your record? So that unique field that is used to identify that record is what is called a primary key. Okay, so a primary key is used to uniquely identify a record. So in this tracks table or entity, the track number is a primary key. Okay, in this musician's entity or table, the musician's ID is a primary key. In the student's data, in the student's table, the student ID is going to be the primary key. If you got the motor vehicle, the driver's license is the primary key. Okay, and maybe at Central they use the social security number, okay, as the what? Primary key. Sometimes you have that. If you go to the assignment, when you're looking at the assignment, I talk about, so I tell you about what are the different primary keys for those different entities or those tables that we're creating for the assignment. So remember that. So for you to have a relationship database, what happens is the primary key in one table is going to be repeated in another table, but in that table is not going to be the primary key, but it's going to be the foreign key. So if you look at the tracks table, we have the track number as a primary key, and then you come back here and you see that we have what? What is that? For the recording ID here, okay? So probably this has what is called a composite key. So a composite key is whereby you have a table that an entity that has more than one key. Okay. So this recording musician ID here. See this one here is a foreign key, but musician ID is a primary key here. So the way you establish the relation between the musicians and the recordings is you have the musician ID as the primary key here, and then is used as a foreign key here. So you can establish those relationships. And that is the concept of the relational database. Okay, you have the recording ID here. So this is the primary key. This table here, primary key. Recording ID is a foreign key over here. So you establish those relationships. When you're looking at the assignment, you'll be able to see those relationships. And that's what is called the entity relationship. Remember, we're talking about the entity. Okay, this is an entity, this is another entity, another entity, another entity. You create those relationships through entity relationship, and that helps you to establish what's called relational database model. Are we together?
Yeah.
Okay. So we talk about the attributes here, or what you're calling the columns or the fields, and they give you some examples here. Creating the relationship, we talk about the primary key, foreign key, and all the way like that. So this here is something about the foreign. So read a little bit about this, about how these guys came up with Tableau. So Microsoft Access is one of the database management systems, but you also have others out there. So if you want to be competitive, it's always good to learn one or more. Tableau is very easy to learn. Tableau, if you Google Tableau, you'll see very many videos online, and it's a is very user friendly. Actually, even better than Microsoft Access, and it generates very beautiful charts, okay? And is gaining in popularity. So read a little bit about that, and if you have time, you can do that. So we talk about the concept of the foreign key is a primary key of one table that appears as an attribute in another table and acts to provide a logical relationship between the two tables. So we are able to create a relational database because of the primary key and the foreign key, that relationship. That's how we're able to do that. Okay, so we get some reports. So once we have created the relational database, then we can create some report. And I show you how to create a report in the assignment. You can see all that relationship between this is the customer table, and then you have the customer data, and then you have the customer order. So you have the customer ID here, primary key, and you have the order. So the order has a primary key, and the primary key usually the first and is unique. So each of these records is going to have a unique order ID. So that's how you know that's the primary key. And then you have what? The customer. So the customer ID, it doesn't have to be unique in this table because there's a foreign key, and a customer can have more than one order. So we see 23 and 23. Okay, order ID 23 and 23. Okay, they belong to maybe one customer. Okay, so customer ID has to be unique because it is used for uniquely identifying the customer, but one customer can have more than one order. So this order here and this order, they belong to customer number 23. And if you want to know more about the customer, you come back here and then you have what? 23 is Dave Sub Shop, David Logan, and that's his phone number. Okay. Also, we have the people who order online. Okay. And you can go at another table, another entity, and then you have the distributor and on like that. So you have been able to create what you're calling a relational database. And this is the data inside there. So like I mentioned in the assignment video, you don't have to be the programmer who is doing this. You might be the guy who is entering the data, or you might be the business analyst, the person who is in between the client, the customer who owns the data, and the person who is doing the programming in designing the database. So know a little bit about that. Okay, so these are some of the advantages of using a relational database, and you're talking about flexibility, scalability, data redundancy, increased data security, and data integrity. What we mean by that is, if you look at this example of the data that we have right here, okay? If you have one table for customers, anytime you have new data about your customer, you can just add that information right here, okay? And if a customer leaves and you don't want to keep the information, you can just come to this table here and then you delete, okay? So that way, you are able to ensure that you have what? Flexibility. You have that flexibility. Also, the word scalability. This table can grow. It can grow, it can grow, and you don't have to do anything about the orders. The only time that you come to the orders table is if one of these customers places an order. Then come in and populate this table. Okay. Also, security. Not everybody needs to have access to all these tables. Maybe some people have access to the customer table, others will have access to the order table, and others will have access to order online or the distributor. So that helps to ensure security. And that's what is happening. When you go to Banner, you have access to different tables or entities, and then you have also different security levels. So those are the advantages of using a relational database. Because if we had all this in one table, okay, then it becomes very difficult, because if you have a new customer, you have to go in there and then add the information about them, and then you have to leave some of this information blank in that big table, because you can have a customer who doesn't have any order, okay? So that leads to, remember those issues about incomplete data and errors and things like that. So those are some of the advantages of using a relational database. Are we together?
Yeah.
Okay, so note about that. Security, redundancy, we don't have to, redundancy means what? Repeating. You don't have to keep repeating the same data, because you only have one data about the customers finished. So that is that. So here it talks about the flexibility and the performance, latency, time it takes for the data to be stored or retrieved. If you have a table that has 50 columns, it becomes very difficult to update the data. Okay, because even entering data into that table is difficult, because you have to go through 50 items. Errors are usually going to happen. Redundancy, okay, duplication of data, we don't want to do that. And then integrity, so is higher. So we're saying integrity constraints are rules that help ensure the quality of the data. So the database design, so you do that during the database design. Okay, and like I said, when you're designing the data, if you are designing how people are going to be entering the phone number, you can specify that you have the first three letters entered. First three numbers are going to be in parentheses. So that's how you ensure the integrity. So read about it. We talk about the business rule. So in the assignment, there's actually a concept on the business rule that says a customer can have what? More than one pet. Okay? A pet, when it comes for a visit, a pet can make a visit, but does not necessarily need medication. So those are some of what you're calling the business rules. So you'll see those when you're working on the assignment. And then, of course, security. Okay? So identity management is a broad concept, deals with identifying individuals in a system. Okay, so I'm trying to use Banner because you're familiar with that. So when you go to Banner, you have different access rights. Okay, or privileges, what you call privileges in the database management system. Okay, so that means that there's some things that you can see, and also depends on the duration. The same thing with me. Once I teach a class and I'm done with that class, if I come next semester, I can see the students who are in my class, I can see their grades, but I can't change that. Okay, because that is also based on the time period. So we have different access control rules, and that ensures the security of the data. Okay, so unethical data mining, we are familiar with what I think Facebook did, and it's also happening now with the election around the corner. So you'll be able to see some of those concepts. So read a little bit about that. Okay, data quality, go through that, do that. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so let's see what's the next item here. So data warehouse and blockchain. We have a few more minutes. So this is talking about the business intelligence. So once you have designed a database, and you go ahead and populate the database, and usually when you populate the database, it's like you have a form. So usually when you go on the internet and you're buying something, and you have that form that you have to fill in, like you have a form about payment and you put in your name, your address, your credit card number. That is actually an input form. And what is happening is that's the form that is used to collect data that's going to a database. And then when you hit the submit data, when you hit submit, that information goes into a database. So from that, if you have Amazon or Walmart or Target or whatever business, at the end of the day, they look at the data about the items that have been bought. And then from there, they can do some analysis and they are able to generate some information and also business intelligence. Okay. So you start with the data, you have information, and then you have business intelligence. So business intelligence is nothing else but you're saying what? Many organizations today find it next to impossible to understand their own strengths and weaknesses, let alone their what? Biggest competitors. Because the enormous volume of data, which is inaccessible to all but the MIS department. So most of the organizations actually are trying to make sure that everybody has access to the data. Okay. In the old days, data only used to be available to the people in the MIS department. But most of the most effective businesses, they make sure that everybody knows what is going on. Okay. A data point is an individual item on a graph or a chart. Okay? And for an organization, data is going to be structured in a database and it has a lot of information which can have different data points. That's voicemail, customer phone call, blah, 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 all the way like that. So is this book that is actually very useful in business, which is called The Art of War. And author says that for one to succeed in war, one should have full knowledge of one's own strengths and weaknesses, know who you are, and then a full knowledge of the enemy's strengths and weaknesses, know who your enemies are. Okay? And most of the businesses actually do that. So we know about the CIA. Okay? So CIA tries to collect information about what? Foreign agents. Okay, so they central Central Intelligence Agency. Okay, so intelligence is that right there. But businesses do the same thing. You need to make sure that you know about your competitors. What are they doing? And business use different techniques to gain this. Some of the techniques that they use is they listen for the announcements. So usually at the end of the year, most of the publicly traded companies have to issue some financial disclosures. They have to file financial records with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And in those documents, most of the companies write some information about their strategies, what they're going to be doing, what the new product that they're trying to be coming up with, and on like that. Okay, so some of the companies go through that to see what their competitors are doing. Like Walmart will do that to see what Amazon is doing. And now we see that Walmart is actually trying to compete with Amazon. They have the prime, that concept of the prime time that Amazon started. So you collect the data, and then you look at the patterns, and then you respond. So Walmart, hopefully, maybe they realize that Amazon is making a lot of money, and they say, okay, let's try to do that. We know the concept of the same-day delivery. Okay, there's not very many companies that do that, but very many companies are moving towards that. Okay, most of the companies now are actually offering delivery, free delivery, if you buy items up to a certain point. And also they offer free delivery if you accept item to be delivered within a certain period. Okay, so all these are concepts that started with one company, and then somebody saw that that company was making some profit, and then maybe they replicated that. So that's part of what you're calling business intelligence. You cannot have business intelligence without the data. If your data is not correct, you won't have the what? Right intelligence. The war in Iraq, there are very many people who say that it was based on what? False intelligence. Okay, so that is a practical application of what false intelligence leads to. So make sure that you are familiar with those kind of concepts. So this is an example of how you can analyze the data. So you have your data and you have the different sources. You collect your data, and then you analyze. By analyzing, you're asking the questions, the right questions, and then you communicate that, and then you can also sometimes do what? Visualize. So you have patterns, and from those patterns, you'll be able to see how you're going to lead or make decisions. Okay. So you have rich data but poor information. Okay, so this is a concept that is out there because we know about the concept of big data. Okay, companies have a lot of data. But if you don't have the right tools, okay, to analyze that data, and if you don't ask the right question, you won't have the what? The right answers, and you won't have the right information. So we need to be aware of that, be familiar with that. So read a little bit about that. Okay, so business-driven innovation, apply your knowledge, a little bit about that. You can read that. We talk about aggregation, aggregate, putting everything together. Okay, so a data set is an organized collection of data, and comparative analysis can help to compare. Okay, you compare, you do analysis, then you compare, and compare two or more data sets to identify the patterns and the trends. Okay, so these are some of the examples where you can apply that. So airlines analyze the popular vacation locations with current flight listings. Okay, so almost most of the U.S. airlines they fly to Cancun. Why? It's a popular tourist destination. Okay, in terms of banking, understand the customer credit card usage and non-payment rates. If you read the news, you'll be hearing things saying most of the customers have been late on paying their mortgage. Most of the customers are late on paying their credit card. That is information that banks need to know. And how do you do that? You go look at your customers and then you look at how many they are paying. You compare that with the previous month, and then you're able to come up with a pattern. And then what do? Maybe you'll have some incentives. Okay. So in terms of the mortgage, most of the mortgage companies are telling their customers, we can work with you. We'll give you maybe a grace period when you don't have to pay your what? Your mortgage. Okay. 2, 3, 4 months, like that. Okay. Same thing with the healthcare. Demographic of patients with critical illnesses. So if you are the insurance company, you need to know who are the people that you're insuring. That's why you see sometimes some of the companies will increase the insurance rates because they're looking at the demographics and they say a lot of people that they're insuring have a lot of what? Pre-existing conditions and things like that. So you cannot come to those conclusions if you don't have the right data and you're not doing the right type of data comparative analysis and all that. So read a little bit about that and keep going on. Comparative monitoring, where a company keeps tab of its competitors, is very, very important. And you can see an example here of the question that you can ask, and based on your data, you're going to come up with the right answer. So why are sales below the target? So you have a sales man or a manager, and they're looking at their sales, and they say last year we had sold $500,000. This year, at the same time, we have only sold $200,000. What is going on? Okay, because we sold less in the Western region. Okay, so why did we sell less in the Western region? Because sales of product X dropped. Okay, so you are able to identify that from analyzing your data. And you go on. Why did customers complaint increase? Because late deliveries went up 60%. Okay. Why did we have late deliveries? Okay. Maybe there was a snowstorm. Maybe the weather. Okay. Maybe the fires and on like that. So what are you going to do about that? Okay. Are we together?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's the concept of the data warehouse. Okay. So if you are not a CSB major, you don't need to go into more details about this, but if you are, at least you need to have an idea. Okay, so we have the concept of the source data, identifies the primary location where data is collected, and then we have the raw data, that is data that has not been processed for use. Okay, so when you go to a store and you buy some items, whatever they are collecting there is just raw data. And then they collect you, and then the next customer, and the next customer, and then they analyze that, and now they're able to do what? To come up with some information. Okay, so raw data that has undergone processing is sometimes referred to as cooked data. Okay, so I said information system, we use language that is already very common with everyday activities. Aggregation is the collection of data from various sources for the purpose of data processing. So you collect data from a store in Durham, a store in Cary, a store in Raleigh, you put it all together, you aggregate, and then you analyze, and then you're able to come up with the sales for what? This region, okay, for a certain store. And then you do the same thing for North Carolina, South Carolina, and on like that. And you're able to come up with the sales for the what? For the whole country. So if you have a store or that has different locations in different parts of the world, you do the same thing. So that's the concept of the data aggregation. Okay, so reasons business analysis is difficult from operations database. We have sometimes inconsistent data definitions. So if you have inconsistency in your data definition, that will be a problem. Okay, that's why, for instance, for you to get a GPA, we have ensured that if you look at the definition, an A starts from what? 90 and above. A B is from what? Is it 81 to 90 or something like that? Okay, so that's consistency. Okay, so that when you, at the end of the year, when you graduate and you have a 4.0 GPA, is going to be based. It doesn't matter whether you took classes in criminal justice or school of business or education. We have that consistency around. Okay, and then you also have to make sure that you have standards. Okay, managers need to perform cross-functional analysis using data from all departments, which defines in granularity. Remember we talked about this. So you need to have the standards. Okay, quality, the quality of the data, usefulness, access. Okay, so most data stored in operation database did not allow users direct access. Users had to wait to have their query questions answered by MIS professionals who could use SQL. That's not usually very good. Okay, if people are making decisions, you need to make sure that they have access to the data that they use to make the decision. So that's very, very, very important. Okay, so read a little about that. So data warehouse is nothing else but is a logical collection of data gathered from many different operational databases that support business analysis, activities, and decision task. Okay, so this is a concept that you're going to hear a lot about data warehouse. And now as we get more and more data, we'll be hearing about data warehouses. So we talk about extraction, transformation, and loading, or what is called the ETL, and that is a concept that we apply in a data warehouse. So this is an example of how we end up with a warehouse. This is a model. So data warehouse will have data from different sources. Okay, so we have internal databases. So there is data from marketing. They are collecting data from about marketing. Sales, they have their own data. Inventory, they have their own data. Billing, they have their own data. And then we also collect some data from outside about the competitors, about the industry, what's happening in the industry, any regulations, any new companies that are joining in. We have mailing lists about who we are going to be sending information to. Stock market analysis, what is happening in the stock market, okay? Because that impacts how businesses do. And then we use the ETL. Remember, we talked about the what? Extraction, transformation, and loading, because this data might be in different formats, okay? So we put all of it in the data warehouse. We want to make sure that everything in the data house is uniform. And then from here, we can come up with what you're calling data mart. And data mart is nothing else but is a collection of what? Contains a subset of the data warehouse data. So this marketing data mart might contain some information about marketing data and some of the people that you're going to be targeting in sales and also in terms of the billing. Okay, so that is the relationship between the database, the data warehouse, and the data mart. Okay, so data mart contains a subset of the items in the data warehouse. Are we together?
Yes.
Okay, so we talk about the data analysis, and we're going to be finishing in a few minutes. Data analysis and relational database contains data in a series of two-dimensional tables. Okay, so we have the rows and the column. That's what we mean by two-dimensional. Sometimes we can have a data cube, which is three-dimensional. Okay, so in cube A we have different stores, different products, and different promotions that we have done. Okay, so if you look at cube B contains data about promotional 2 for what? All the products in all the stores. Okay, and then cube C contains data about only promotion 3 targeting, let's say, product C in store 2. Okay, so there are some tools that will actually help you to be able to see this data like this, and this is what you're calling visualization. Tableau is very good at this. You can visualize your data, and it helps you to be able to analyze the data, and you come up with this different concept. So this is a way in which you can carry out what you're calling the data analysis. So you also have another concept of what you're calling data lake, which is a storage repository that holds a vast amount of raw data in its original format until the business needs it. So data lake is where you collect all the data and you put it in there. Okay, unlike the data warehouse where there is some transformations that have been done, data lake is where you have all this data stored in one location. Just like a lake, you got all kind of stuff in there. You got fish, you got alligators, You got bottles, you got trash, you got water, you got rocks, everything. Same thing like that. Okay, then you do the cleansing or the scrubbing, which is nothing else but is the cleaning. Make sure that you're removing the redundant data. Okay, so cleansing removes duplicate data, misleading data, incorrect data, non-integrated data, and then data that violates business rules, and on like that. So once you do that, then you can start making your analysis. Okay, so these are some of the examples that you can read about data that is not clean and how it has been cleaned, and you end up with clean data and what cleaning is all about, and on like that. Okay, visualization. So this is an example, and Tableau is very good at this. You have data, and then you're using some tools to help you visualize and see the data. So here you can see the farm economy, and you can see how it has been growing. Okay, productivity you can see. So 30% soybeans, 40% red meat and poultry, and this is increase in productivity between 1987 to 2009. Okay? So milk produced by an average daily cow. When you compare a cow in 1987 and 2009, the one that we had in 2009 was producing 57% more milk. Okay, so maybe the hormones or the feeding or things like that. Okay? So this is very easy. We say a picture is worth 1,000 words. You have this data in a database, and then you visualize it. You generate these reports because these are basically reports, and then you're able to see that. Okay? So that's very, very important. Visualization. You can also use infographics, which is information graphics, combines that, and you can see that. So low weight, 18 to 34, most of the people in that age group have low weight. And then you can see as you move up higher in terms of the obese, 65, 74, 1, 2, 3, and then what is this? 75 and above. Not very many people who are obese in that age group. Okay, so data artists, on and on like that. So read a little bit about blockchain. I think we're running out of time, but this is another very important concept. So go through it. It's not a big section. Actually, it's a very short section. And if you have any questions, let me know. And we're going to stop there for now. Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to post this on Blackboard, and you're going to have two postings. So one is for the assignment, and one is for the course for this week. If you see a B major, this is a very important chapter. You should revisit it. And I'm going to stop